Number 12, worst press. Boy, there's a lot of competition in this field. And I'll just hit generally on some of the things that I consider terrible. Anytime I see a press that has only 2 platens, that's a candidate for worst press. The people who get 2 platens are going to be printing on one while they're flashing on the other, which means they're flashing 50% of the time on the platen. And frequently those platens are made of melamine. Melamine has a white surface on the top and is very subject to warping. So if the platen is under the heater 50%, you can count on the platens being warped, and then you have all kinds of registration problems. If you have one of those presses, put a steel straight edge on it and see if the platen is crooked. If it is, you need to change the platen material. So the companies that make presses and the people who use them, who know what they're doing, if they have a floor model press, minimally have 4 platens. Why? I print on one, I rotate that underneath the flash, that's station 2. Now I'm loading and printing the second shirt. Okay, then I rotate that underneath the flash, and I'm loading and printing the third shirt. Meanwhile, the first shirt is out from underneath the flash, and it's cooling. So they have minimally 4 platens, so there are 2 platens that are cooling. So when that platen comes around and I rotate my screen to print the next color, my ink is cooled enough to print on it. And I'm not subjecting the platen to as much heat. Of course, if you have an automated flash, that's the best deal because you can really limit the heat on the platens. But 2 platen arrangements, bad news. Here's another candidate for worst press. These all-in-one units where you have like a conveyor dryer underneath the press, and here's the screen, and you got the heat from the conveyor coming up right on that screen. Not a great idea. If you're doing process inks or certain kinds of inks, water-based, solvent-based, whatever, you're going to dry the ink in the screen while you're printing. You don't want heat on the screen. And the other thing about these all-in-one units, frequently it's like one unit is your exposure unit, it's your press, it's everything. And that means you only can do one thing at a time. So if I'm exposing a screen, I can't be printing. It's sequential, as opposed to where the press is totally separate from the flash, which is totally separate from the conveyor. So you can be doing multiple things. And if your exposure unit is in another room, you can have a screen exposing while you're out here knocking out a couple of shirts. So you want to have each function be separate so one doesn't depend on the other getting done. You can have more than one person working. Those all-in-one units are not professional. They're really a scam, and I wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole. So that is what I would look for. And then of course you can get into, for worst press, is the machine really rock solid, or does it rotate on a Lazy Susan, for example, as opposed to like a Timken bearing. Bearings require pressure in order to work. If you have too much pressure, then of course it won't rotate. But if you have not enough pressure, it'll flip-flop, and if it's flip-flopping, you're not holding registration. Lazy Susans, or those type of arrangements, are not tight. They don't have pressure on them. Bearings can be used with pressure and should be used with pressure so that you have a tighter unit. So you want to look at those kinds of issues. So there's a lot of competition on worst press. My answer on this issue is look before you leap. Look at all the options, understand them, understand the financial consequences of each one so that you don't get burned. Number 13, lucky 13, and that is having a fan in the darkroom or where you're making screens, particularly if you're using liquid emulsion, because that fan will stir up the dust. The dust will settle on the screen, you're coating your liquid emulsion over it, and that's where pinholes come from. Pinholes also come from using power washers. You should never use a power washer in the screen printing business. If you know what you're doing, you don't need a power washer. But you got to be careful about fans. Even around the press, for example, a fan won't hurt plastisol ink, but if you're dealing with water-based ink or a solvent-based ink, whoa, fan will make that ink dry real quickly. You really want the air to be still around the press, okay? But if you look at a shop where they have racks and they're putting coated screens in there and they're using some sort of fan to dry, that's bad news. Now, if it's capillary film, it's okay because capillary film is rolled down a screen with lots of water on there, and that water is running off the screen, flushing the screen of any dust, so you're not putting the capillary film over dust. So if it's capillary film, you can use a fan. In fact, we recommend a heater fan to raise the temperature to speed up the drying. So you can get your screens a lot quicker with capillary than you can with liquid. But around liquid emulsion that's wet, never use a fan. And if it's a screen that's dry that you're going to be coating later, same story. No fan, because the fan will put dust on that screen. In fact, those screens should be in a box where all the air going in and out is filtered in order to prevent dust from getting in the box and on the screens. So beware of fans. That's the problem.